Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, a podcast revealing secrets of life lived overseas. We use storytelling to deliver insight and information on what it takes to live, love, move, and travel across the globe. Our guests are professionals from the world of global mobility. We hope that by opening their diaries to share their wisdom, that you, our listener, can benefit and enjoy more ease and grace in your expat life abroad. Hi, everybody, wherever you are right now as you listen to this. It's my pleasure to welcome my co-host, Sharon Fields.
Thank you, Doreen. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Louise Wiles. Hi, Louise. Welcome.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Louise supports clients to thrive through the challenge and opportunity that comes with change and transition, including international relocation. Louise uses a strengths-based well-being framework as the foundation for her work, helping clients create positive change based on an inspiring future vision. She draws on her professional and personal experience, as we all do, as an expat, a repat, narrative coach, and learning and development professional with an academic background in organizational psychology. She's the author of Thriving Abroad, the definitive guide to professional and personal relocation success, host of the Thriving Abroad podcast, and co-host of the podcast Student Transitions, A Time to Thrive Questions. We have a lot to talk about today, huh? You're a multifaceted woman, so we have a lot to discuss with you.
So let's start off. Shall I start?
Yes.
Let's start off with, tell us a little bit about your overseas journey. I know that it was a little bit ago and now you're back in England, but tell us about how long, where were you, what were you doing, please?
Okay, well, I guess it started when I was a child because I lived in the States when I was very little. And then we moved to the States. I think I was probably about 2.5. And we were moving for forever. And then funding up caught my dad's a scientist. It got cut on his projects and we ended up coming back to the UK. So we were actually, forever ended up being about 3 years. And I came back when I was still very tiny, don't remember a huge amount about it. And then I just lived in the UK for all of my childhood into my adulthood until I was about 30 when my husband was offered a job in Madrid. We'd had discussions about jobs before that and decided not to move, but this one he actually moved to, and I carried on working in the UK for about a year, and we had this kind of commuting relationship, not perfect, wasn't going to work for the long term, definitely not. And so in the end I left my job and joined him in Madrid. And then that was the beginning of about, well, I guess the next 15 years. We spent 2 years in Madrid and then we moved to Lisbon in Portugal. And we were there for a good 3.5 years. And then we came back to the UK for 3 years. And he then joined a big American cosmetic company and working as their European director. And he was traveling all over the place, but based in the UK. That wasn't sustainable long term, so we were looking at moving to the States, to Dallas, and I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about that because at that point I wouldn't have been able to work. It wasn't easy to get working visas for the partners who travelled too. So in the end, we went to Madeira, and so we moved to the island of Madeira. There's a long story about how that happened, but he got a job in Madeira, and we lived there for 5 years. Then we went back to Lisbon for 4. And then we finally came back to the UK. Whether that was the right choice or not, we don't know. We did. Pros and cons.
So do you speak Portuguese and or Spanish? Do you speak both?
Oh, no. The Spanish never really sort of embedded. I mean, I did speak Spanish because in Spain you kind of have to speak Spanish. You don't get away with it there, particularly. Well, you certainly didn't then. In Portugal, you can so totally get away without speaking Portuguese because the Portuguese love to speak English. So I did speak reasonably okay Portuguese, but I have to say we've been back 9 years now, and every time I go back, I understand it, but it's not as forthcoming as it used to be. My husband, he speaks fluent Portuguese. He still works in Portugal, so he's always back and forth, and we have lots of holidays there. But yeah.
So you're
my shame, no, not fluent anymore.
So you have quite the international experience, living in a country, bouncing back and forth between countries. You've been an expat, a TCK, you've been a repat, so you've been around the block a bit on this what we call the globally mobile communities, right?
Yeah, I guess I have. It feels a bit like I was, and then suddenly I wasn't anymore. So it's, yes, I do. Now we've been back nine years. It feels like it was almost not another life, because we go back to Portugal a lot. We have strong links back to Portugal, and 3 of the family are now Portuguese nationals. They've got Portuguese passports. Not me. I have to stay married to my husband for a few more years, and then I get that privilege.
Oh, wow.
But that's great given the Brexit, and so now my 2 daughters both will be able to work in Europe if they want to. So,
and what a wonderful gift that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
I frequently bemoan the fact that my husband, who is essentially American, although he's only 50% American, but he had an US passport. Now he's the only one. Well, my daughter is an Irish citizen, but between he and I, he has the European passport and I don't, because of my British one, of course. Bye Europe. So it's even that was traumatic.
We don't know that those things are going to happen in the future, so we can't really plan for those things.
No, we can never plan for that.
No, I never expected that. I mean, we'd been back in the UK 2 years, and that we did not expect that outcome. I still remember waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and checking the results and thinking, no, it can't be going that way.
I was there. I was actually in England. Yes. And then I left there to come back to America on my way to Australia, and COVID hit. So everything changed drastically. So would you choose that way of life again if you had the choice?
Funny, we were having a conversation about exactly that question the other day, because it comes with pros and cons. Obviously it does. And for me, career-wise, it probably presented a load more challenges, but then equally I've got to do a lot of what I really enjoy, which perhaps if I stayed in my corporate career I might not have done. No, I would do it again. I would perhaps do different bits of it differently, but I think the richness of experience that we've all gained from it, and that strong connection to Portugal, which is such a beautiful country and beautiful people, has been worth it, definitely. And strangely enough, Spain as well. But then we kind of left Spain, and it's very strange. We never go back to Spain. Or we go to Spain skiing, but we don't go to. We haven't been back to Madrid for years and years and years. I keep saying to my girls, who are both learning Spanish at school and uni, we need to go and do a good tour around Madrid and show you the Spain where we live.
Or you could come to Mexico if you just want to practice.
We could come to Mexico.
Oh, yes.
No, it's a possibility. Yeah.
We could show you a good time in Mexico.
I might take you up on that, Doreen. We're talking about a big holiday next year, so
this is a great place to come. I mean, I think people should come to Mexico City and San Miguel and maybe one beach town, and then you've seen, a little bit of everything that is in Mexico. It's a phenomenal country to move to and being an expat. It's a phenomenal culture to adopt and to learn, and I am not even scratching the surface of the history, the culture, And I love the fact that it's so multicultural and intercultural. I mean, right here, we are actually on the Otomi and another Indian tribe or indigenous tribe. And we're on their property here in San Miguel. And that comes through in day-to-day lives and in the way that people look and in what they sell on the streets and in how they prepare the food. So it's very multicultural. And of course, we love that, don't we?
We do. It's a huge, diversified country. So,
yeah, very much so.
Beautiful.
So you used to have a podcast, or I don't know, is the podcast still going, Thriving Abroad? Yes?
The podcast is still available. It's still out there somewhere in podcast land, but I haven't taken it down. Yeah, but I haven't been adding new episodes to it. People still go and listen though. I still get some downloads every month. But yeah, I'm trying to decide what to do with it because there's some fantastic content on there that I would love to keep in some way. I don't want it. Oh, I've got it all anyway. I've got recordings of it all. But yeah, use it.
This is just to point the listeners.
How to use it.
Yeah, this is just to point the listeners to the fact that that podcast is still out there, and it's Thriving Abroad with Louise Wiles, Wiles. And if you are looking for information on thriving and having a good life overseas, a life well lived, then that is one other resource. So I just want to point people to that. And we will be asking you about your current podcast in a minute. But first of all, I know that you have a well-being framework. Now, the well-being framework, is this of your creation, or is it a system of well-being?
No, my well-being framework, well, I suppose bits of it perhaps I've created and sort of built on, but the core of it is a very well-known well-being framework, which is Martin Seligman's PERMA framework.
Right. Yeah.
And I sort of knew about it, and actually interesting, when I wrote the book Thriving Abroad, I kind of had it in the back of my mind, so probably it did influence some of that, but I didn't explicitly use it because I wasn't sure from a copyright perspective, and I just couldn't face having to sort that all out, so I didn't. But then just more in the last 4 years, I've done some work with Dr. Michelle McQuaid, who lives in Australia, and she has what she calls the Change Lab, the Wellbeing Lab, and now also a Leadership Lab. And she works with lots of people doing research into those three. And one of the things that she has done, they started just before the pandemic and carried it through the pandemic, was to run some wellbeing research into the Australian population. But also she did one, I think, in the States. I think she was living at the time in the States, and looking at using the framework PERMA and creating a great big research project around wellbeing in the workplace, which is extended then to wellbeing in schools and education, and now workplaces too. Well, workplaces it was, but and with leadership now. So it's kind of evolved, as you expect these things to. But a lot of the work and the studying I did with them around change included a wellbeing framework, and they use PERMA, and that's because she studied with Martin Seligman, and he challenged her to go out and measure well-being, and so she did, and she measures it through. And you can go and do a PERMA survey for free, actually, at her site, permasurvey.com, if anyone wants to. But really? So that's kind of the core of what I do, and it's evolved and developed, and I've kind of, from the core materials that I had with her, I've expanded and evolved it.
That's great. So, what were your primary ways of thinking about well-being back then, when you were on the grist mill? When you were moving from place to place, and what did you rely on the most for your well-being? I'd like to ask that, and I'd like to ask, and how has that changed, as a follow-up question?
Yeah, I think, well, the interesting thing is I don't know that I really thought too much about it from the perspective of well-being that we talk about well-being these days, actually. So that's an interesting, you can see how that's evolved. And when we lived in Madrid, I started to do my master's in organizational psychology, and I decided to do my dissertation on the experience of expatriation and expectations, and how when people have, people obviously move abroad and you have expectations about what life's going to be like, but also in the corporate world, you have expectations around support. So I did my work around partner support and how the expectations they had about the experience impacted on their adjustment. So in those days, everyone talked about adjustment. They talked about cultural adjustment and adjustment to the environment, and I can't remember so it was Black and Stevens and their 3 categories, and I used that. And so I guess in answer to your question, when I thought about how I was doing, I probably would be thinking, well, how am I adjusting? But certainly not in the way I think about adjustment and transition now, which has evolved through membership of FIGT and all the conversations we all have around what adjustment means and transition now. I think that's probably a more used word.
Yes, it's much more common than it used to be back then.
Yes, yeah. I think then it was probably culture shock, a bit of talking about culture shock, understanding, because working in the corporate world, I knew about we would talk about in training sessions with people when we were talking about change, we'd talk about the U curve, the valley of despair, as it was often called, or the W.
I know. And the
then
damn iceberg.
And the iceberg, yes, of course, yes. I was thinking back to me now. And then I remember when I went to the conference, FIGT, Families in Global Transition conference in 2014 in Washington, somebody did a presentation on I'm going to remember his book, the name of the book now. The guy who wrote the book on transitions with his wife, it's done for corporates. Oh, I should have looked this up before I spoke to you. Sorry. It will come to me suddenly. And if I do. Anyway, that then started me thinking about transition and what transition is. And yes. And then we had the grief cycle and everyone started talking about that. And so it's kind of evolved. And with that, I guess, has come this idea around, how do we look after our well-being as we're relocating? And that for me has evolved a lot, yes.
Yeah, my exposure to the well-being side was when I was in Saudi. I got very connected to it through the artist way. You've heard of
yes, of course, the artist way. Yes, I think that might have featured in my journey somewhere too.
And I was I ran classes in my home in the artist way, and people went on to do these amazing things as a result of it. and that was really fun. One fellow who's a dentist, he was very tall, he's like 6'4", but he started learning the tango, and he'd go to Argentina for 5 days from Saudi, and he'd go to Holland on every vacation, and he became like this amazing tango dancer and teacher. Wow. And did that for about the last 10 years before he retired back to the States. And that was just like real transformation. And it really, that connected me a lot to the sense of whatever system you use to build your well-being, pick one that works and just work the system.
Yeah. And I think that's where the sort of M in PERMA, meaning and mattering, they talk about mattering now as well. And I think because thinking back now to when I was doing my dissertation, there was a lot of work done about the trailing spouse. There was a big research project done by a lady whose name I'm not going to now remember, but I remember contributing to that and answering the survey for her.
Yes.
And I think, and then when then moving on a few years with Evelyn Simpson, who I worked with and was partners with, we did a survey on the company partners experience, and a lot of the findings that we took from that was about sort of finding that meaning and purpose for partners. Yes. Obviously, it's really, really important in their relocation. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Louise, let's talk about launching to move overseas. Where do you feel people should put their focus when they're preparing to move, and then when arriving?
Okay, so I think launching and moving. So I once had an online program which was all about making the decision. This is before programs were ever online. And I remember it was all very basic technology, and I then stopped having it. I didn't have it after a while. Stopped using it.
You were a trailblazer.
Perhaps I should have kept it going, didn't I? But I remember, so the decision making, and I remember sitting thinking about how important it was to make an informed decision. So, but that was from my perspective. And I know there are adventurers out there who go, oh no, you don't want to do that, you just want to go. So I think we're all different in how but the one thing I felt for people who are making moves, probably in the corporate sector with organizations and families, it's important to lay those foundations, to be sure that you're making an informed decision for you, but then also for your kids and for your partner. You know what you're moving to, what the opportunity means for all of you. And you have a vision for what you want to create as a family there. So that, I think, is really important in launching, that you know why you're doing it. You have clarity around that. And if you're taking other people, then you have responsibility for them. So yeah, some thought for them as well. And partners in particular, because we know what a challenge it can be for partners, depending on where you're moving to in the world, and depending on your sort of career orientation and what you want to do whilst you're there, and to go not knowing that A, you might not be able to work, B, you're not going to perhaps be able to pursue your current career, I think is sad for people. So having clarity around all of that. So that's the launching. And then I think once you arrive, it's this transition process, knowing that it's a process. This is all the stuff that I now on my current podcast talking about students, we're talking about transitions to university. So we're going through all of this. It's using all this experience from moving between countries and applying it to life transitions as well, but recognizing that it's a process, that it takes time, that you need to work at it. And often the sort of amount of what you put in is often what you get out as well. So, but not always, because of course, if you move to very difficult locations where it's difficult to get involved in communities and things, which sometimes happens, that's tough. So recognizing it's a process. I was listening to, I think it was your podcast with Lisa Doreen, Lisa Furland, and you were talking about. And you were talking, I think you were talking about how long it took you to adjust to your life in the Middle East.
Yes.
Saudi, yeah. Yeah. And well, she was talking about that too for Sweden, but
it took me we were there for 15 years. And I would say it took me 5 years to get over the shock. And I had lived in the Middle East before. The Middle East was not new to me. I lived in Dubai, different culture though, totally different, and different experience, and different compatriots and colleagues. And I was working at the time. So it took me 5 years to find my feet, 5 years to manage the churn, because then we had all these, the Iraq War, and we had 9/11, etc. And then the last 5 years was when I just fell in love with it and did not want to leave. So, when we talk about these transitions, they can be short or they can be really long. And the way we think about them can sometimes extend that time period.
Yes. But also it demonstrates how sort of external factors can impact the transition process too. So you can go with all the good intentions that you're going to adjust and you want to try new things, but then, if external things happen, such as 9/11, Iraq War, then it makes it more challenging. Yeah. Yes,
much more challenging, definitely. And so let's talk about the skills and mindset, my favorite topics. Having had this all these overseas adventures, have you found that blending your personal experience with your learned educational journey has helped you build different skills or mindsets? Or what would you say to people about building skills and mindset?
What, just generally in life or in relation
Oh,
to?
when they're moving, when they're
Mm.
when they're globally mobile.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I think mindset. Well, I guess your sort of approach perhaps depends on your mindset. So at the beginning, I mean, I've been thinking about this a bit for something I was creating recently, and thinking about, well, what kind of mindset do you need for for coping well and managing well through periods of transition, whatever they are, whether it's international or not. And we all have different mindsets around change, and that probably comes from our upbringing. And I remember when we first moved to Madrid, it took me a time to decide I wanted to go, and I wasn't that open to it, if I'm honest. I think that might have come from the life that I'd lived in the UK, where my dad did work abroad a lot, but we didn't move with him. Mm-hmm. We would go and visit, we'd stay in the holidays with him, but we didn't go. My life was very much UK based, and I couldn't imagine a life outside of the UK. So it's kind of broadening your mindset. I guess that's what happens. Yes, you move, you realize that there is this whole world out there, and different cultures, different ways of being, and hopefully that inspires you to learn more, and you're excited by that, and you open your mind to the impact of changes in your life, and I think we all approach life with a different perspective on that. So it can be different for different people. But what I would encourage people to think about, if they are thinking about moving or have already moved and are living, is just to think about, well, what did influence my mindset in relation to change prior to moving, and how is that evolving and changing now, and how can I involve it myself? And I suppose it's about looking at the growth that can come from the opportunities, so growth mindsets, and embracing the challenges as well as the opportunities, recognizing that from challenge can come growth, even though it's painful at the time. And I suppose that's what I've learned through all the multiple moves we've made. Some have been really quite challenging. We moved to Madeira. I was 4 months pregnant, and I had a 2-year-old daughter. My husband was working in Madeira, but he traveled hugely, and it's a small island. I didn't meet people for quite some time. It was a lonely place to be for a while, particularly pregnant and away from home and parents and support. And I found that really, really difficult. But I think as a family, we learned to rely on each other a lot. We are quite independent in that sense. I don't know whether that's good or bad. I think I'm quite independent as a person too, and sometimes that's great. I can stride out and do stuff. I think that is one benefit of living abroad. You learn to do stuff for yourself. Equally, perhaps you become too self-reliant, and I do sometimes think to myself, you need to involve more people, you need to ask for help. And that's a very good point. Yes, because sometimes we're not willing to reach out for help, and I know I can be particularly stubborn. Some things I'm willing to ask for, and I think that's part of being self-aware, learning where our blind sides are, what we don't. I don't know what I don't know about myself.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And you just made me think there, because from a business perspective as well, I think I've got to do it all myself.
Yes.
That's not really very possible.
This podcast has been wonderful, because it's really sort of shown me, and I hope Sharon too, because a lot of this has been, a lot of people on here have come from my connections with families in global transition. And I wanted to start a podcast for about 5 years. But no, did I reach out and say, hey, could you help me? And no. And so it's just been sort of magical the way and the way Sharon brings, a different thought process and different background and experience and culture and everything to this. And I think that it's really important to continue being inclusive of all sorts of ways to think about this. So it's good to have our balance here.
And have a diversified guest list and have guests from all different backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what we're seeking to do, is present a tapestry of people, some you may know, some you may not, who are excited and willing to share the wisdom, the inspiration, and the growth mindset that is involved when you have to move and when you transition.
And we hope it will give all the listeners something to think about. Take a pause, as we talked earlier. Take a pause and think about what information is being provided to you, and all the different guests and experiences that we bring to you. So, Louise, tell us where our listeners can find more information about you.
Okay, so my latest podcast is Successful Student Transitions. So if you have a student in the family, particularly of university age, that's what we're talking about mainly on the podcast now, go and take a look at that. Although we do have a parent series as well, actually, for parents who are empty nesters. That's kind of embedded within the,
Wonderful.
So we're just having some conversations about that because we felt called to. So that's what
I think that's a terrific idea, because it's not this or, it's this and.
Yes,
and it goes both ways. Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there, you can find me on LinkedIn, Louise Wiles, and I also have a website which is currently not up, but it will be soon, louisewiles.com.
Little.
So I keep fiddling around with that, changing it slightly and never actually making it live, but it is there and it needs to be put live. So that gives me some incentive to do that quickly. But actually, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find
Well, definitely. We'll put that in the show notes.
Definitely.
But there is one question I would like to ask you, and that is it's kind of a different thinking. But going forward, what would you love to see the international communities focus on more?
Is it logistics? I mean, I think logistics, well, it depends who you talk to, but there are plenty of companies that offer the logistics care, and you would hope that it's done well because they have vast experience and sites and technology behind them, it seems, these days. So I think probably it is more around the care for the family transition and the transition for them. But then it depends whether we're talking corporate or,
That's
personal, people making decisions, refugees and so on. But certainly in that case, I would say, the care for the actual transition, certainly if we're talking about refugees or people migrating from
migrants, yes,
because I think
more care for the internationally mobile communities that are perhaps not the privileged communities. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because I don't think there's much around. I mean, I know. But then I'm beginning to see more, because I'm beginning to see charities setting up, and I was just talking to someone the other day in the UK who's working on a project. So it's exciting that that's beginning to be seen to be necessary. I think, and I think in the corporate world as well, there's a lot of lip service paid to all of this, but actually no action often. I mean, with big multinationals, probably there is, but the smaller companies, what I'm hearing is there's less money and people don't see it as so necessary. So people are left to make their own way. So things like Families in Global Transition providing sort of location support, and community, I think is a really needed.
I think also intimacy. Becoming more intimate with each other and becoming more intimate with the situations that are going on in the world, and beginning to recognize what are the one small things that we can do, even if it's a smile or a kindness, or if there's something that we can do to make a difference in our little corner of the world.
I think that's lovely.
We had a guest school us in recently.
That's right.
Do you have any other questions, Sharon?
No, I don't. I've enjoyed meeting you, Louise, and hope that you can come back again sometime.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and we will share your links, etc., on the show notes. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you both, and all the best with the Nomadic project. I mean, I think this is a great idea, and I love the idea of a tapestry of stories. That just really appeals to me. So look forward to seeing and hearing all the stories in the future.
Great. Thank you.